Okay, I'm here with Libby for our ceremonial interview. Libby, thank you so much for being here.
It's my pleasure. There's no one I love talking to more than you.
Lucky me gets to hang out and talk to Libby all the time because she's one of my oldest and dearest friends. And now, lucky you all get to hear from her too about her therapy journey. Oh, did I use that word? Really? I guess that's what it is, your therapy journey. So let's dive in. First question, Libby, what made you curious about therapy in the first place?
It was less a curiosity about therapy and more of an imperative. When I was in high school, I had an eating disorder, and I had this really wise, wonderful friend who suggested that I should tell my parents. So I did, and the logical next step after telling your parents I have an eating disorder should be and was, okay, well, we're going to have you talk to a counselor. So it was the end of my junior year of high school that I started seeing a therapist for that. And that was the beginning of many years of counseling experience.
So a little bit feeling like it was necessary. And also, you were underage. So maybe a little bit of just deferring to the grown-ups in your life. Like, there's something going on. We think this would help. Why don't you go give it a try?
Yeah, well, like, in fairness, the main grown up in my life at that moment was probably my friend Caitlin. But, but yeah, there might have been some strong suggestion that I needed to get some help from someone who could help me beyond what a friend or a parent could help with. So yeah,
Oh,
yes,
bossy from the beginning. That's me. Um,
it's that boss though.
so
It really was that. I mean, that was the turning point. Was like you suggested that I probably needed to talk to someone, and I knew that it probably needed to not be my parents, and they were open to that and asked if I wanted that, and then helped me find someone.
okay, so what was that like? Do you have any idea like how you ended up with the therapist that you ended up with then?
I don't. I was just thinking about that probably they did what most people do and checked their insurance to see who was in
Mhm.
network and who
Yeah.
was available in a shorter time frame than 6 months out. And I have no idea. I didn't choose. I didn't choose the counselor. They
Okay,
did. Probably my dad, based on what we had available.
I see. Okay, so when you did meet with this counselor, how was that? Like, what was it like as a teenager to walk into that room for the first time and be in that space?
It That's a good question. I went with I think I went with my dad the first time. I wasn't alone the first time. And I don't remember it being scary or intimidating, but it was a little foreign. Like, it's such a different format from conversation that you typically have. And one of the things that was most interesting, which would be super weird and interesting now, was having your parent in the room. And so having a stranger asking these questions, trying to find out what's going on, and for me to be able to answer them, and then to hear my dad's answers about his view of things. um, that element of it was really eye-opening, in that it was really vivid firsthand experience of how the way we experience life and the world can be really different from someone who's living that same experience with you.
Totally. Yeah, it's such like a trip to hear how people interpret things and how people might see you or interpret you versus what you think you're putting out there or all of it. I know it's not the same thing, but it reminds me of couples work, where I mean, it's your dad, it's family therapy, it's different, but that same situation where we're in the same relationship and yet, we're experiencing things so differently. Um,
Never thought of it that way, but as we were talking about it, I was thinking that exact thing,
mm,
except it was, yeah, with my dad. We weren't going in there because our relationship wasn't working,
right,
luckily. So,
right,
so
right. So it was kind of lower pressure, but it was
yeah.
kind of eye-opening of, wow, like he really sees it differently than I do. Interesting. So the way you talk about it, it sounds like it was generally you said it was foreign, but I don't get the vibe that it was like a negative. experience for you. Is that fair?
Yeah, it it is. It was kind of just like you go into any new social context and there's a period at the beginning where you're just trying to understand the lay of the land. Like, what are the social norms? What is this interaction supposed to look like? Like, how do I address you? What is
Mhm.
the appropriate amount of time for me to talk? Because we're here for me to talk, but like, can I ask you questions too? Like,
Mhm.
it was more of that. Like, I don't know how this interaction is supposed to work. So
Sure.
I guess I'll ask you questions if I really can't figure something out.
It really is like going to a foreign country. Like you're it sounds like for you it's kind of feeling like curious and a little timid and what do I do and how does this go? And so did it feel like it was a good fit between you and the therapist back then?
It didn't feel like a poor fit, but having seen many therapists since then, I wouldn't say it was a great fit. I didn't continue seeing him for years and years. I think I only saw him for a year or maybe even a little bit less. I think he was a good person to see initially. Like, I think that all the therapists that I've had were the right therapists for the time when I had them.
Mm.
But some of them were definitely better fits than others. I would not say he was even top 50% of best fits of therapists that I've had. But there's nothing bad about him or the
Sure.
interactions.
So not like harmful, just
No.
more kind of like neutral and okay and good enough for what you needed at the
Yeah.
time. Do you know if he was a specialist in eating disorders or teenagers or anything like that?
I don't. These are really good questions. I would ask myself now when I'm looking for a therapist, but that
Right.
I don't think my dad knew to ask, and I certainly didn't know to ask. So
Right. Yeah. So what was the most helpful part of that work with that first therapist?
I think that experience of talking about emotion in that way was really helpful. I always liked to write, and a lot of writing is reflecting on how you're feeling and turning it into a format where you can look at it from the outside. But it's very, very different from talking with another person about it in more of a matter of fact way. Like, in writing, you're trying to frame it a certain way
Mhm.
or enhance certain emotions. And it was not like that. Like, my goal has been to not enhance certain emotions, but if they feel enhanced to me, to just explain that, like,
Mhm.
rather than try to make them feel that. Does that, I don't know if that makes sense, but it's just more objective. It's like you're forced to have an objective conversation about how you feel.
I
So similar to writing, but different goals for sure.
yeah. Okay, cool. So being
What
able
was your question?
talk like what was helpful so to be able to talk about emotion and just be open and kind of frank and almost like almost maybe scientific or kind of like explorative where it's just like this is how things are. I'm not trying to elicit anything out of you. I'm not trying to package this is just kind of what's there and having the space and then just the to kind of practice like to be able to do that with somebody who it sounds like kind of knew what he was doing like he could do that with you, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say one thing that I have observed through my years of therapy is that it also that gives a good barometer for when something is really like needs to be addressed or I'm feeling really strongly. Because if I'm striving to talk about something objectively and all of a sudden I start crying or I feel really angry or really small,
Mhm.
and I'm in the mode of trying to objectively talk about something, like, then I know that is something I'm feeling viscerally and we need to talk about that. And maybe I need to spend some time feeling that. So that's that is something I've learned over years of therapy too.
Cool. And it kind of is rooted in that first experience, with
Yeah.
that first time spent practicing, just talking about emotion and recognizing what's happening.
Yep.
Interesting. Okay, cool. Um, so what, if anything, didn't help or didn't work?
Well, that particular therapist, there was nothing that didn't work. What doesn't work? I feel like I don't want to say this for people. If I can tell that someone's going to let me control the conversation or let me make them feel certain things, then I don't think that's a productive pairing. That's a bad match for me.
Like if you're too in charge or too
Yeah.
in control,
Yes.
they're not challenging you or calling you out on things.
Yeah. Or even if they drift into starting to relate their experiences to mine,
Mm.
then yeah, exactly. And I have a talent for asking people questions to keep the conversation on them. And if they'll let me do that, like, I'm paying them to listen
Yeah.
to my, not there to learn, but I will just do it because I don't know. I don't know why I do it, but I just know that if that's happening, it's not going to be a good match.
Well,
That's not helpful.
it sounds like you have, I mean, some self-awareness, around what you do, maybe to cope or to keep people at bay or to keep a kind of safe distance between you and people. And if you can loop a therapist, like a trained expert, into that pattern with you, I mean, that's what you're trying to break, probably, or at least shift a little bit in your therapy work. So it's a good, I mean, it's a good test. It's got a little bit of like an evil genius behind it.
That's why I didn't want to say it.
No, and it's legitimate because I talk a lot with clients and just in general about how important it is to keep the client as the center of the work. And that doesn't mean that like I'm not a human or that I don't exist. It just means being self-aware and kind of in tune with myself consistently in sessions so that when someone is asking me, I get questions a lot about my religion or if I'm married or if I have kids. And it's not that I dodge those questions or avoid answering them. It's more like, I wonder how come it's important for you to know that, and what would it do for you to know that I am or am not, X, Y, or Z? And that usually is really revealing. And it's not that I'm perfect at it. And I've certainly lost track of it, in sessions for sure. But it's a good barometer, for how things are with the therapist and how rooted the therapist is. And maybe they need their own therapist if they're talking about themselves too much or getting too into the friendship part of the therapeutic bond. Interesting. So, okay, so we've kind of segued a little bit more into your therapy experience in general. If it's okay, going back to that first therapist you had. You said you worked with him for a year, and then
Yeah.
so how did that end, and how did you know it was time for that therapy to be done? What kind of was the process there?
My recollection of it is not super clear, but what I remember was um at the end of each session I would ask, so when do I need to schedule the next one? And there came a point when he said, well, when do you want to schedule the next one? And I think I asked him a question that was like along the lines of, well, am I fixed? Like, am I free to go? And his response was basically that if I felt like I was okay, then I didn't need to come back.
Mm.
That I could just come back when I felt like there was something I needed to talk about. Probably not exactly what he said. He probably said it better than that. But
Sure.
my impression was like, there is no longer imminent danger. I
Oh,
can come when I'm ready to come back.
okay. So like the door is open, but in his opinion, you were kind of good to go on your own.
Yeah.
Did you make that decision by yourself, or did you talk with your parents about it, or was it just kind of something that fizzled out? Like, how did it really end?
I think it just fizzled. I am sure I told my parents. I don't remember consulting them though to ask if it was okay to stop going. So my dad went with me the first time or maybe two times, but after that I was going by myself.
Mm.
And my parents were good about asking like the general how did it go, but not ask what we talked about or insert themselves too much into it. Like they gave me the space and respect of letting it be my experience.
Mm.
So yeah, I don't think that they were part of the discussion about when to stop. think when I told them after like a month that I was, and they asked about it, that I wasn't going to back, and I told them why, they seemed like, well, if he thought that it's okay to not schedule anything, then schedule something when you need something.
Okay. So after that, I'm curious, what were you, 17 or 18 or something like that?
17.
Did you, as a 17-year-old, did you kind of think like, okay, like therapy is done, check it off my list for life, and I'm healthy now, and, you know, all set kind of? Or what was how were you feeling about your own mental health and emotional health and all of that?
I think it was more just like, so that's it. It was, okay. Like
Yeah.
I didn't have like a sense that everything was good and I was never going to have to go back to therapy. I was self-aware enough to know that wasn't going to be the case, I
Right.
guess.
You were ahead of
But I
yeah.
also wasn't like, well, put it on your calendar that in a month you probably need to check in with yourself and see if you should go back. Like I think it was a couple years before I went back to
Mhm.
another therapist after that.
Okay. So, I don't want to drag you through like the details of every single time that you've decided you needed help and found a therapist and all of that. I mean, unless you want to share them. What I think could be
For so long.
what I think would be useful is, and you can maybe share specific examples if it helps to kind of communicate it, but in general, like how have you known that you needed a professional to help you through something, whether it was at 16 with an eating disorder or something else later in your life? Like how did you know? Was it external sources encouraging you like it was the first time around, or was it you got good at kind of being in tune with yourself and knowing I can't really get past this on my own? What's the general vibe?
um Okay, well, I'm glad you brought that up because now I do remember one thing from that first therapist, which was in having this conversation about like, so am I healed from my eating disorder? One of the things that he said that has really stuck with me was, if it starts to interfere with your school or your relationships or your ability to feel healthy, then you need to talk to someone. Like then it is not being managed properly. And so that's been my guiding wisdom with other things too, is if it starts to feel like what I'm thinking about or feeling is creeping into time that should be spent engaging with friends or family. And when I say should, like a time that I want to be
Mhm.
engaging with friends or family, or times when I'm at work and that's a time to work and I can't focus because I'm thinking or feeling something else. Those are times when it's the right thing to ask the question, is there something big enough here that I need to go talk to someone?
Yeah. Cool. So is it interfering? Like, is it getting in the way and I can't kind of manage it or process through it and put it where it belongs kind of by myself?
Yeah. And like that doesn't mean because you stop going to work because you've gotten that dysfunctional, which is
Sure.
possibly past, but just like you're not living your life the way that you want to
Sure.
be able to live it because you're
Sure.
distracted by this.
Yeah. Like on paper, you're functioning, things are fine,
Right.
but internally there's maybe chaos or tension or distraction at least.
And that yeah, like not everyone has a day or two where they're distracted,
Sure. Sure, sure,
but
sure.
if it's consistent, then
Yeah.
yeah, time to do something.
Okay. So again, kind of in general, what is it like? How has it changed for you over the years to, find a therapist, figure out if it's a good fit, gone through the process of maybe using insurance as an adult or getting referral? What's it been like to navigate that?
Also a good question. Where I am now is, it's helpful if you have a friend who's a therapist who can suggest certain types of specialties that would be helpful. Like emotionally focused therapy, for example, would be good.
Mhm.
Then you go on to Psychology Today and find people who have that area of expertise, and then you go on to insurance and see if they're in network. But actually, what I did this last time was I had a pretty clear, like a clear idea of the specialties that I wanted in a perfect therapist. And so for me, that included cognitive behavioral therapy and addiction and trauma. And there was a list of things that I wanted. And so I looked for that in Utah, and there's like a certain certification that I was looking for. And she's not on my insurance. I didn't check the insurance because I am confident that that is what I need right now. And she's amazing. And so I think I wouldn't have been able to do that though 5 years ago, even. I wouldn't have known what to look for. So I think everyone's it's just different for everyone.
Sure.
And I think it's a little like dating, and that sometimes you just luck into finding someone who's a really, really good fit. And sometimes it takes the work of the matchmaker of Google finding you exactly what you want. So yeah, so that's how I pushed it this time. I knew exactly what I was looking for. And there was one person in the state of Utah who had everything that I was looking for. So I
Wow.
paid full value to see her, no insurance. And she's one.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So I'm glad you brought up the kind of factor of insurance and money and kind of paying the whole thing for your by yourself or out of pocket or trying to get some help somehow. And that's something that comes up in every single one of these interviews. And I know was a factor for me when I was looking for therapy is how am I going to pay for this? How much is it going to cost? Is it worth it? How do I know if it's worth it? It's such a tricky dynamic. And like you say, it's person to person, it's very different. And then even like therapist to therapist, stage of life to stage of life, it's different. Whereas now, like it's worth it for you to get exactly what you need, pay every penny of that fee yourself, and move yourself along in the way that you want to be moved along. Whereas at 16, like you just had to go where your parents could take you and probably where their insurance could take them. In your earlier adulthood, probably like you said, 5 years ago, you wouldn't have known really what you needed. So you just kind of followed some of these little roads, like maybe through insurance or referrals. But it changes and shifts, and willingness to pay for things, priorities, financial priorities change. It's really interesting. Have you ever gone through your own insurance as an adult or gone through any sort of like program, anything like that?
Yes. So I absolutely do not want to say anything negative about free services that are available through work and insurance. My experience with those has not been great. And that's another one, like that's an example of where I say it's partly just luck. Like it is entirely possible that the people that I saw were a perfect match for a bunch of other people who saw them, but they weren't good matches for me. And that was actually where I learned that it was going to be helpful for me to come into the experience with some idea of what I wanted. Because otherwise it's just blind date after blind date after blind date. Like you've got nothing guiding whether it's going to be a good fit or not.
Yeah,
I don't know.
sure. Yeah.
Did I
Sorry.
answer?
So, I like what you said. What did you say that what you got out of those mismatches was the ability to know what you wanted so you could find the right match, right? And I love how you're careful to not like bash free services or anything like that. And I don't get the vibe that you are. It's just more, well, that didn't work, kind of on to the next attempt. And so many, when I think about my own, first experience with a therapist, it was through insurance, through the military. They just signed me up with somebody, and I was so grateful to have somebody doing that work for me. And I was so grateful to just show up and cry for an hour every other week. Like that was what I was ready to do. And even when I look back and recognize when she would try to challenge and push me, and I was just like, we're not doing that here. I'm just going to cry. That's what this is for. And it was right for me. Right. And so that was great. But then when I went through insurance again with the military, I don't know, 3 or 4 years later, I had 2 strikes. It did not work with these first 2 attempts. And then I went outside insurance and found the person that I needed, which I think is similar to what you're describing. Like I needed to know what didn't work in order to really hone in on what did. Um, Interesting. Okay. So in general, what has been the most helpful, the actual therapy work? What have you taken with you? What helped you for a while and maybe didn't help, doesn't help anymore? Just what kind of stands out to you in terms of therapy, actual experience of therapy?
Like, okay, I'm going to answer the question with the answer that came to mind, but then tell me if you are looking for something slightly different and we can add to it. One of the most profound things that I learned in therapy was that a lot of what I was feeling could be helped by my knowing what my intrinsic worth was, and that I have also intrinsic characteristics that make me me. Like, they are separate from experiences that I've had, and they manifest the way they do because of the experiences that I've had. But like, my kindness and my strength and my bravery and my loyalty, those are exactly how they look, is because of how my life has unfolded. But to be able to just grab onto those things and say, like, no matter what is happening now, no matter what happens in the future, those things are me and those things have worth, like 100% worth. Like, those things are enough, like, on their own. There are no holes, any needs. Like, I can look there. That's where I should start, is what am I already that I love, that has value? Because that stands on its own.
Libby, it's amazing. I wish we were in real life together so I could
Hug.
snug on you, because it's so amazing. I'm it's such a transformation, and it's an abstract idea that you're describing, but at the same time, like, I don't know anything that feels more concrete, and more real, more of an actual shift from kind of before therapy or before healing to, I don't know if after is the right word, but after the active, like the really intense active part of that work. Um, Gosh, so as you're thinking about that big piece of the therapy experience for you, how did you get there? I mean, was it therapists just kind of repeating and highlighting and showing you in different ways, reminding you that this was all there, and you're whole, and it's real no matter what? Or did you do specific, like, exercises? Was there homework? Did you read a book? Anything, I guess, tangible?
Oh my gosh, there was so much work. I was just thinking about this recently, and I don't remember why, but I was talking to someone about this discovery, and I was trying to remember how I got there, because I remember the conversation with the therapist as he was explaining this concept, and I was like, just not getting it. And I remember him stepping me through it, but I think it took more than one session to step through it. But one of the things that stood out to me about that experience was that it was a joint effort, in that I didn't necessarily see everything that he saw. Like what we were talking about at the beginning, like my dad sees something different in me than I do. So there are things that I believed about myself that aligned with what he said. But sometimes I think when we hear what other people have to say about us, it reveals things that are there that we miss for whatever reason. So I remember at school, my master's of applied positive psychology. A lot of it is about strengths and developing your strengths and how you use them, and your signature strengths. And anyway, so we did this activity where we put a little note into a bag for each person in the class, talking about a strength that we had observed in them. And when I got mine back, someone was like, oh, we're in this and we're supposed to do research. Someone should do some analysis on number of the number of comments that are consistent about one strength, and does it matter? Like, I don't know what the framework was that they conceived.
Yeah.
Yeah, super nerd. But but I hadn't gotten mine back yet. And I remember when I got them back thinking, like, on a less scientific level, I'm just curious to see what the common threads are here. And the strength of strength came through. Like, so many people said something about me being strong. And I just remembered, like, I never thought of myself as a strong person. Like, that's not how I would identify.
Mhm.
But it still resonated when I read it over and over. And then I was able to, and he had said that in our conversation, and I still didn't even accept it when my counselor had said that. But seeing it over and over, it was like, you know what? I think that's real. I think that's part of me.
Mm.
So instead of feeling insecure about it or wondering, I'm just gonna embrace, like, I think that's right. I'm gonna put that one onto the list of things that make Elizabeth Elizabeth.
That's amazing. So lots of like reflection and being, it sounds like kind of some gentle repetition, like here's what might help you to understand, here's what might help you to adopt in terms of like a belief system, and then specifically to you, here's what I see. You know, is there part of you that can accept it? Is there any piece of it that feels right to you? And it sounds like some of it you were like, yeah, that's me. And some of it, this idea of being strong, like that is not how I identify. That's not me. But slowly over time, it kind of just trickled in and made its way kind of into your own definition of yourself. And that's really cool. And it's what really is very cool is how therapy has become an integrated part of your life. Like it's not, I have my life and then I go to therapy. It's that you can see how these relationships with different therapists and then relationships with fellow students, and I'm sure relationships with family, friends, coworkers, you know, with your own child, all of these different relationships kind of moving together in different ways to help you heal, you know, and maybe therapy helped put that kind of lens on things, and maybe the first place or maybe the only place to have this explicitly drawn out for you, at least until you got to your own graduate studies. Gosh, it's fascinating. It's so cool and it's so moving. This is just so, it's just such a privilege. I'm so glad you're here talking about it. Okay, so um, when you think about therapy as a process, does it feel like it's something that will end and you'll, I don't know, there will be like a post-therapy you? Or, and if so, like how will you know, what will be different? And if you've ever felt like you were kind of done with therapy, like what was that like? And how did you know, or how did you know you didn't need that therapist anymore, even if you didn't think you were never going to see another one? You know, what's that been like?
Well, I think it's a lot like, again, it's a lot like dating. It is more like dating than other relationships
Mhm.
in that it's kind of different with everyone. Like sometimes someone moves, and so then that's the end of the relationship. They're in another state now, and long distance therapy is not going to work for me. So, so sometimes they move, sometimes they have a baby, and then they're done for a while, and I still need someone, so I go start seeing somebody else. Like sometimes there are external factors that make it happen, and then sometimes you have this feeling like I think the work that we needed to do as a team is done. And sometimes there have been situations where I've thought like this chemistry just isn't right. I still have more work to do, but it's not going to work here. So sometimes there's been a sense of closure. Sometimes there's been a sense of like, this is the wrong path. We're not making progress anymore. And there have been a few times, maybe one or two, where I was just like too tired. I don't know how to describe that other than that, except for that we had worked through something major and I just didn't have the energy to keep digging and diving into new things. Like I just needed some time to integrate what we had processed and new skills that I had and new paradigms. Like when we're talking about this shift from feeling like you don't have worth to believing that you do, like that is not a thing that happens fast. Like you need time to start living your life differently and seeing like, okay, well, what does that do to my relationships if I actually incorporate that into how I interact? And so I think that's been okay too, to just take times away from one counselor where I don't see them for a while and then come back. And in this most recent case, took some time and then realized I needed something else for someone else for the next chapter of my life.
Yeah. Oh, I love it. It's so cool. I love, yeah, because integrating, like I said, therapy is not just something you kind of go off and do on the side. It's really incorporated into your everyday life. It's a lifestyle kind of transformation. It's from the inside out, everything is changing for you. So taking a break, taking a beat to see how it feels and be curious and observe and all of that is so valuable. And I don't hear any fear. Like, it doesn't sound like you are afraid of losing that relationship, or afraid you wouldn't ever find another one, or another, like we're talking about boyfriends again, but like that you wouldn't be able to find the right fit down the road, or to not have that backup plan, all of that can feel scary to some people. But it sounds like for you it just felt like kind of a natural ebb and flow. And I'm sure at the time there were emotions about it, but more just when you look back at the general pattern of it, like therapists kind of come and go and the right one's there at the right time, and you're feeling more assertive in your understanding of going after what you need. And that's cool. You're cool, Libby. Okay.
Thanks. Thank you.
All right. So, and you can answer this as like a teenager, or, maybe in between different chapters of your therapy, like you say. But I'm curious, what would you tell your pre-therapy self?
Does everyone cry when they answer this question?
I have been the only other one who like teared up, and I was interviewing myself, so it's so, like, so lame. But I totally was like making myself cry at my own answer, and I don't know. Over the computer, I can't totally tell, but I've never seen like tears falling for anybody else. But yeah, to me, it's a very moving question. It's my favorite one. So you're not alone.
Well, my face like gets all red and contorts. You'll see and
No,
watch.
you're
I,
cute.
I would tell myself that you're loved and you're lovable.
And there it is,
And then
folks.
to give her and be like, you got a lot to figure out.
This is the magic of therapy. And it's not because any of your therapists were perfect. And it's not because you were perfect. And it's not because anyone, did any one thing. It's just that kind of consistency over time. And sometimes it's a year of intense work and a life has changed forever. And sometimes it's a year of intense work, and then a couple years later, another year of intense work, and then a couple years later, another, but each step, each movement in that direction is magic. There's just something really untangible and yet so concrete at the same time, intangible and yet so concrete at the same time, that happens when this works. When it works, it's just really, it is magic. Thanks for talking to me about this. So fun.
Thank you.
You're the best. Okay, thanks, Libby.
Okay.